All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. The 177th Scientific Governance and Risk meeting for MakerDAO. Today is Thursday, February 3rd, 2022 already. Seems to be going by fast. Here joined by a bunch of awesome Maker people who are interested in the protocol, many of us working for it, and here to talk about the kind of current issues at hand, do some reporting about what's going on in governance, and talk about our risk things. So a couple housekeeping matters. This is being recorded, you might have noticed. Hello, if you're watching on YouTube. Let's try not to talk over one another. Is both rude and annoying for the recording later. We do have a chat as well as you're free to unmute and share questions, opinions, anything like that. If you're unable or otherwise unwilling to do so, please you can drop your comment in the chat. I'm happy to read it. As David is pointing out in the chat, using the raise hand function is super helpful as well. That way I can call on you, know you have something to say, and don't have to worry about jumping in over something. All right, that's enough rules, I think. Let's get to the agenda that David brought up here. So as usual, we'll start out with our governance roundup, talk about the votes, the status of the MIPs, and what is going on the forum. Next, we'll do a quick initiative update. This is going to be on the security initiative. Are we calling those working groups, David, or is there a better term?
No, they're just like higher level initiatives. I guess you can group them under like coordination calls or stakeholder alignment calls. Like they are working groups, but I don't think we've been calling them that.
Cool. Well, you'll hear from a bunch of awesome people from core units who are meeting, talking about the security initiative. Then we have a few different discussions we identified for this week. First being talking about EthDenver for those that are going. Then we have governance compensation improvements, and if there's time, DAI liquidity solution design, as well as open discussion. Cool. So should be pretty standard if you've been here before, but if you're new, welcome, and we'll get right into it. So starting with votes, was a fairly quiet week on the poll front. We just had one weekly poll that did pass. That was the Open Market Committee's parameter proposals. And there are two ongoing green light polls. The vote ends for those on Monday. So please be sure to go express your opinion if you are inclined to do so. And yeah, that's polls. The executive front, we did have those kind of double executive, but last Friday's executive passed just fine, mostly focusing on the core unit budget transfers there. Tomorrow's executive contents, you can expect the recognized delegate compensation payments, a redeployment and increase of the emergency shutdown module threshold, as well as those Maker Open Market Committee parameter changes that I mentioned in the previous slide. So fairly straightforward, I think, on the governance end. So I will pass it over to Pablo to give us a rundown on the MIPs.
Thank you, Peyton. Hello, everyone. Pablo here with a MIPs update. So yesterday was the last day for changes for proposals that enter the monthly governance cycle. February's formal submission window opens on Monday the 7th and closes on Wednesday the 9th. And we are now going to do a quick review of the proposals that are eligible to enter this monthly governance cycle. So we have two eligible MIPs as opposed to sub-proposals, MIP 60, Intangible Asset Assignment, and MIP 61, Delegate Compensation, which is more in RFC actually than ready to be formally submitted, and whose trial is probably going to be extended. We also have one coordinate onboarding. We have a proposal set for a Maker talent coordinate. This proposal set has recently seen a large revision, so please go check it out. It's a coordinate whose mission is to give MakerDAO a competitive advantage in terms of attracting and retaining talent. We also have a facilitator on and offboarding simultaneous. Dennis is aiming to become a DAX facilitator, and Philip is stepping down from the role. Note that MIP 41C5, that is the offboarding, won't be going up for a vote, as it's a case of a voluntary amicable resignation, or that's my understanding. I don't know if Peyton has any objections here. Also, we have 3 coordinate budget adjustments for risk, CS, and IS. And we've got a couple of amendments too. One for MIP 55, which aims to improve its clarity, and one for MIP 64 that aims to make the process of payment for small bug bounties more agile. And this entails an amendment to their current budget too that adds a new stream. Note that MIP 4C3 sub-proposals, that is sub-proposals that amend proposals younger than 3 months, enter the weekly cycle and must pass as signal request. That is probably going to be posted soon. I'll be in touch with you, Joshua, to assist you with the process in case you need help. Finally, we have our first MIP 63 C4 sub-proposal that onboards the TechOps Keeper network. We have some proposals in RFC 2. We have, what do we have? Sorry. Next slide, please. Thank you. I think that's the, no, that's correct. We have 2 MIP 63 C4 sub-proposals that couldn't quite make it into this governance cycle for onboarding to other Keeper networks. And we also have an amendment because we've seen a number of involuntary coordinate-related affordings in the last couple of months, and the current process has proved to be a bit cumbersome, a long run, like this presentation, and so now we're seeing an amendment that aims to improve the relevant process components in MIP 39, MIP 40, and MIP 41. And I guess that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Pablo. We appreciate it. Awesome. That'll take us to our forum updates. We have Artem on the call to go through those.
Hey everyone, the forum at a glance will be posted right after the call, just a little time crunched. But yeah, welcome to the forum at a glance, weekly recap of what's happened on the forums, and I'll try to keep it short. All right, let's begin with the announcements. So first up, Strategic Finance published a proposal for asset and liability management called the Alm Framework, and that aims to help optimize Maker's balance sheet and profitability for token holders while being subject to a certain set of risk constraints such as solvency and liquidity. The post is pretty comprehensive. It really breaks it down. They break down solvency and its risk, as a liquidity and its risk. And also the proposal closes off with a couple of open questions to the community. So check it out, give it a read, and answer the questions. Next up, we have Strategic Finance Core Unit, again, posting the actual expenses versus budget for December 2021. And they also bring along a 3-month forecast. A couple of key points, DAI expenses increased to 2.4 mil from November. Onboarding the Tech Ops and Strategic Finance increased our DAI burn by about 250,000 per month. Expected expenses to increase by 130,000 per month. And also as GUI prices are going up, it will be less favorable, but hopefully that doesn't happen. They also provide a couple of charts and sheets breaking down everything for the budgets and expenses. And next up, the long-awaited moment, Growth Core Unit finally follows the interim intangible asset assignment and requests management over the MakerDAO Twitter account, currently owned by the Foundation Core Unit. So a couple of benefits that this offers is the account will be an additional resource and leverage to successfully achieve the protocol's ambition. It will help identify more strategic partnerships across verticals and regions, improve worldwide understanding and potential use of DAI. The account will, be much more, it will improve outreach and just talk about the community, about lending services of Maker, and some cool a little math I did, 2-second math, is that it actually increases the outreach by 45-fold because the MakerDAO Twitter account has about 45 times the amount than the Growth Twitter account, which is cool. I'm excited. They also present their next steps and a couple of other things that they already planned. And we're moving on to our active discussions. So having inaccurate data can easily lead to poor decisions by ourselves or others, which is why Strategic Finance Core Unit spends a lot of time checking data and analyzing discrepancies. In a short post of actionable steps, Sebastian shows how someone can make 320 mil DAI that would be badly accounted for disappear. The concern in accounting and applications has been previously discussed and is just brought to light to spread awareness and importance of accounting for the protocol. Next up, the community continues to inquire when marketing core unit, and insert meme there. So in response, Long for Wisdom published a structure on the actions that can be taken to make it easier for MakerDAO to attract individuals or entities wishing to fulfill that role for the marketing core unit. He briefly explains how MIP 13 works and asks the community to help make a difference in the DAO by engaging to fix problems and utilizing our resources. And next up, I personally raised the question for whether the GNR call snippets are valuable. And that's because I bring a couple of points of repetition of information, time spent, their value, and I am putting the snippets value under question. So please check out the post. And it's an informal poll, so take a vote and let me know so it could help us make our next decision going forward to make the GNR calls better for everyone. And moving on to our signal requests, we have 4 active signal requests. First up, in response to feedback to the recent proposal, Parify Capital adds some improvements and initiates a signal request to the community asking whether MakerDAO should implement the governance boosted MKR token. The signal ends on February 8th. And next up, the newly onboarded PSM GUSD has a debt ceiling of 10 million DAI. It's close to its capacity of 10 million DAI, and in order to increase diversification on stablecoin reserves, they want to raise the debt ceiling to 60 million DAI, which would represent about 32% of the outstanding GUSD float. And in an effort to push this proposal, GFX Lab asked the community whether PSM GUSD debt ceiling should be raised to 60 million DAI. And next up, with the executive vote that's temporarily preventing surplus auctions and MKR burn as a counteraction to Flappy Friday, Shupi submits a signal request to find out whether the community would like to do nothing and not burn any more MKR until we have a long-term solution in place, or introduce the rate limiting into the flapper published by Hexanaut and thereby bring back MKR burn as soon as possible. And our final signal request, offloading TUSDA, a discussion and signal request submitted over a year ago passed and set the debt ceiling of TUSDA to 0 DAI, which hasn't really changed or helped in any way. So in response to that, Shupi signals to the community with 3 potential changes. 1, offload to a new TUSD PSM with a debt ceiling of 0, activate the liquidations on TUSDA keepers, or just keep this and do nothing. No, they end on February 4th, tomorrow.
Got it. Okay. I was just seeing the bottom of the slide saying January 31st.
Oh man, oh shit. Oh well.
Yeah, no worries. No worries.
Well, that's it for the forum at a glance. There's a lot more. As you guys know, I'm trying to make it more comprehensive. It's like a TLDR now. Takes a little bit more time, but give some feedback on it. You know, there's a feedback survey. Check it out, and there's more announcements, ongoing initiatives, help wanted, evaluations, reports, all the good stuff.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Appreciate it, Artem. Cool. Also realized, I think this is fairly visible, but I am going to drop a link to it just in case. We do keep like a governance tracker. So a lot of stuff that Artem is highlighting, you can kind of see the status of and how long it's supposed to take before it we expect to see it on votes. Yeah, so that just seems helpful. I dropped it in the chat. But that brings us on to our initiative updates. David, who's given the roundup on this one?
It is me. Today we're going to be covering the security initiative here at MakerDAO, and we're going to be talking about our Q1 to Q2 2022 milestones. So here's just the list of kind of the stakeholders involved. The coordination is mainly led by our team and Immunify Security. The initiative itself kind of covers a number of different things. It covers emergency preparedness. It covers identification of like critical infrastructure. It covers bug bounty programs, etc. So it really is kind of like an umbrella security initiative. And so we've identified 4 main milestones, and I'm just going to go one by one instead of what I did last week, giving you guys all of them at once and then kind of going into detail. I'm just going to go kind of sequentially through what we have identified so far. So the first milestone is really to sync PagerDuty across all the relevant core units. So if you don't know what PagerDuty is, it is a application that is used in the event of an emergency to really call upon devs and other key people in the event of an incident. At the moment, we have several different engineering teams and infrastructure teams, and so each of them kind of use PagerDuty in their own silos. And so one milestone for the next couple of quarters is to come to a point where we've all synced PagerDuty across the relevant core units. And some of the components of this milestone are, number one, to document all the assigned primary and secondary coordinators, as well as the subject matter experts associated with various emergency types. This is in progress. Immunify Security is actually in the process of doing this. As well, the second component is to actually identify the ticketing and incident tracking systems that exist. This is also being handled by Immunify Security. And lastly, it's still to do after all of the kind of people are documented. There's going to be a migration / syncing plan around PagerDuty. So yeah, those are the major components there. For milestone 2, we have the completion of the first version of the emergency playbook and associated resource documents. So this emergency playbook kind of lists out several different things, just the basics of how MakerDAO handles an emergency, not just handles it, but what are emergencies? What are the major buckets of emergencies? What are the roles that Maker has outlined? Who are the subject matter experts? What kind of threat monitoring is occurring at Maker, et cetera, et cetera. And then in kind of complementary to the emergency playbook, there's these buckets of resources for individual emergency types, whether it's something like, a missing person, a missing key person, or like an emergency shutdown, or, a critical bug is found. There's sort of like templates and documents and associated resources that are aggregated together and kind of found in one place. And so, yeah, those are the 2 main components, and they are both in progress. The third milestone is the Defcon spell library renewal. So if you don't know what Defcon is, it's basically a list of spells that are pre-written in response to emergency scenarios. These can be deployed kind of really quickly, and it's meant to, not have a period of time where an engineering team has to craft the spell. And so at the moment, there is an existing Defcon spell library, but we've identified that it basically needs to be renewed. And so the 3 components to that, which are all in the to-do phase, are that the risk core unit identifies the high priority needs, mainly like the main scenarios that have to be prepared for. Protocol engineering would write these Defcon spells, and then GovAlpha would write the copy for the spells in the event that they have to get put up, and they have to be in the voting portal and all that good stuff. And also just wanted to note, keep in mind, some of these components may be rewritten, like this is all kind of in progress. So take it all with just a small grain of salt. And then finally, the 4th milestone is the complete launch of the Immunify Security bounty program. So the first component of that was to implement the MIP 64 bug bounty program for MakerDAO critical infrastructure. This MIP actually already passed and is in existence. In progress, there's some amendments to be made for MIP 64 for improvements, mainly around the rapid, like the smaller bug bounties and being able to pay out bounties without the need of an executive, so that the core unit, Immunify Security, can basically pay out of their operational wallet. And also, these slides are available. They're linked in the agenda, so if you're curious to find that MIP, or feel free to go to that slide. I linked them there. Additionally, there is the completion of the draft documentation for the program. So MIP 64 kind of outlines the skeleton, like the framework for the program, but the documentation for the program itself goes a lot deeper. It identifies the actual infrastructure. It kind of outlines like the bounty amounts, and it's just like a whole one level deeper of granularity around the program. And then lastly, there's actually the component of onboarding the stakeholders to the bounty dashboard. So there is a bounty dashboard that Immunify Security is working on that is going to basically be a collaborative effort between them and all of the core units that manage critical infrastructure. And so being able to list bounties there and manage those listings is something that is to be done. All right, that's pretty much it for the update segment today. So running it nice and short. And if you have any feedback for how we can improve it, please let me know.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Appreciate you giving all those updates, and happy to take part and help where we can. Awesome. So that will bring us to our discussion segment. I believe first up we have EthDenver, plans and expectations.
Yeah. So this is going to be really, really short. Basically, there's two things I want to cover here. Number one is just a call out. Anybody who's on this call, whether you're an internal stakeholder, or an external stakeholder, reach out to myself on Discord. I would love to invite you to our room for EthDenver, like our channel in Discord for EthDenver, where everybody can kind of talk and share and ask questions. We also have a shared Google spreadsheet that lists kind of the events that are on MakerDAO's radar, the talks that are going to be happening, like an attendee list of people who you can expect to be there. And so if you'd like access to that spreadsheet, I think it's publicly viewable, but if you're actually going to be there and you're a stakeholder, I'm happy to actually share editing access. And it's kind of like a collaborative effort. If there's an interesting event, please feel free to add it. Kind of everything's formatted and ready for group collaboration there. So yeah, a lot of people are going to be showing up earlier, a few people later. But yeah, there's not really much else there. So I'm happy to kind of open it up to whoever else wants to make any notes here. Like I know Growth is doing some events, and PE is going to be there. And if anybody wants to mention anything on EthDenver, feel free. But otherwise, we could pretty much go to the next discussion topic.
Yeah, if anyone needs help with vegan dining in Denver, I got your back. So feel free to reach out. Anything else we want to say, EthDenver?
Yeah, no, I guess we're pretty much good to move on.
Don't want to get ourselves overhyped, I suppose. Awesome. So next topic is governance compensation improvements. So this topic kind of came up in regards to a lot of the discourse on source cred, right? I believe it was Josh who put up the signal asking if we should remove paid contributors from the DAO from the source cred payment list. So there's some good discussion there. Maybe someone can grab a link and drop it, or I will in a moment. Also kind of comes at an interesting time where Cut Off is working on our next budget. So we're looking at our programs, one of which is source cred that we fund, and particularly thinking about, if there are alternative incentive mechanisms we should be using instead or on top of, or if we should be doing any at all, I suppose, is also on the table.
I'm actually curious about why people think that source cred should be discontinued for people like delegates. Like, I feel like it's kind of like a dynamic additional compensation that can actually incentivize like more participation. Like, there is like a bare minimum, right? That delegates have to fulfill to be, you know, compensated through the delegate compensation program. But I feel like source cred itself is a really good system that we kind of like don't properly like market it, and and like I don't know, I feel like it should probably be kept on, but that's my opinion, but not for facilitators and kind of like employees. But yeah, I don't know, I'm curious what people's thoughts are on the subject.
How much has source cred paid out? Like, I'm just curious, like what kind of sums it's paying out. Because I've gotten something, but not like obscene amounts of money. But maybe because I'm not too active on the forum, like are people making like tens of thousands of dollars doing this?
We distribute 5K every week. So it's been that way for a little bit. You can pull up the site here if you do want to explore.
I think it's something like the largest payout is something like 2K a month or something like that for like an individual.
Okay, and that might be.
Correct me if I'm wrong, pros.
I guess
Yeah, I mean they can get up there, but they're around there. Go ahead, Bourbon.
Yeah, I guess if it's 2K a month to someone who's already getting, a full salary, that could be maybe unnecessary. But in general, I could see it like, I mean, I'm all for like taking it down for people that are already getting compensation, but I think it does still like keep some sort of incentive of even people that are paid to just continue participating more in the forums. Yeah, I mean, I'm leaning towards like keep the money reserved for people that are not already getting paid by us.
Yeah, I mean, it like my thinking is it's kind of like a very flexible, like configurable algorithm, right? Like, is there a way to like assign certain forum users like labels? Like, okay, if you're a delegate, basically, like maybe you still want to give them compensation, but maybe like their compensation is downgraded by like some sort of multiple. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, just to break in here, so since posting that signal request, like, and reading all the comments, and it's, I think a better approach would be to have two source cred instances, like leave the source cred instance that we have working as it is, and then add another one that only compensates contributors that are not already compensated. So to have like two instances, and then we don't have to rejigger things with the old one. We can just leave it as it is and just add a new one that's only for contributors that are not already receiving compensation.
Yeah, so one point I'll make on source code was that one of the big selling points was that it didn't require a lot of micromanagement. If we're going to add like another one and also start adding rules like these people are eligible and these people aren't eligible, then it kind of removes that, which was kind of one of the nice points.
Yeah, that's a good point, Lon. Because yeah, to your point, David, they are kind of constantly shipping new features and new things for the like main source code instance, but it takes work to like properly update ours. There are a couple features that like, could be interesting to what you were talking about. There's particularly one that like basically you can assign a salary to users and they only get paid if their distribution exceeds that salary amount. So in theory, you'd be paid for extra, but as Long was pointing out, that would mean a whole bunch of management just to even keep track of who's getting paid by the DAO, like how much when they get a salary increase. It's kind of a lot for a number of reasons.
I want to bring up the point that actually Mark made in the chat. Like, we need to focus on outcome, not solution first. So with source cred, I know the original outcome was to increase forum, like high quality forum participation. And I know also like source cred allows you to assign like higher cred scores to certain categories of posts. Like let's say like we wanted more participation in signals or more participation in RFC. Like, is that the case? Yeah. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's not the case. That's something we wanted to do, but turned out to not be possible. Or not at least easily possible.
Not easily achievable, perhaps.
Yeah, and I mean, one goal I think is really important to keep in mind is bringing new people into the Maker ecosystem. And that's kind of why I posted the signal thread in the first place, is because I felt like the main beneficiaries of source cred were people who already knew about Maker and were already, participating actively. And we want to try to bring in new people.
I don't really think source cred is a tool to bring in new people. I think it's a tool to retain people, keep people engaged in the ecosystem. If we want to bring in new people, I think we need to do some marketing like of source cred and about the DAO and participating in the DAO.
Yeah, I would agree. It's more about retention, right? Like the idea is there's someone like arrives on the forum and they're super excited about Maker. It lets them like justify the time they're spending, like kind of getting up to speed almost, right, with Maker. And there's quite a lot of just information and context to absorb. And then the hope is that either that person, is happy where they are, becomes a delegate, joins the CU, does something else, right?
Yeah, also, I just wanted to make sure that people understand what source cred is, because I realize I don't think we actually explained what it was when we started talking about it. So source cred is a module tool that we run on the Maker forum to basically reward people for participating on the forum. You can opt in by DMing the source cred admin. If you search up source cred in the Maker forum, it'll lead you to basically the instructions for how to opt in. But as a result of people liking your posts, like the quality of them, the length of them, there's a bunch of different parameters that basically the tool uses to assign you a cred score. And then the cred score is kind of mapped to a DAI payout. So you get, you sign up with your ETH address and you basically get paid DAI for participating in the forum.
Yeah, that's a good rundown, David. It's based on PageRank if you want to get into like nerdy algo details. That's kind of cool. But yeah, we have a forthcoming report from GovAlpha that's kind of going to detail source cred stuff. But the TLDR is that it's really hard to say if it's like effective, right, at incentivizing people to participate more on the forum empirically. And most of the, I don't know if it's fair to say most, but a lot of the support and reasons we do it are kind of anecdotal. So we're definitely struggling with like, all right, so as we look to a budget next year, like how should we think about this and incentives as well? For instance, Long kind of, I don't know, it's fair to say you pitched it, but like you brought forth the idea of like an alternative that maybe like rewards proposals, right? Rewards proposals that pass through governance instead, just directly, rather than trying to reward all the involvement in general that leads to it. And there are some trade-offs there for sure, but that is an interesting alternative we could go down instead. Because basically, like governance participation, right? Like it's it's an interesting problem because it's really important to all of us. So you kind of have a collective action problem where it's like, but the actually maintaining, doing the proposals yourself takes a lot of legwork, takes kind of months of attention to a particular topic. There's all these other downsides that basically make it like, not super advantageous for you as a person to like be a MIP author, for instance. And that's one of the things I would like to see combated. A lot of good stuff in the chat here. I don't know if anyone wants to hop on the mic, but I'd be happy to read out some of these if not.
So I guess like I would say there's two big components to this that we're talking about, right? There's the attracting and building the community aspects, which I think the solution is related to essentially marketing the DAO and source cred, which is a challenge given that we have zero marketing team engaged right now. And the second is the retention piece, which I think there's somewhat broad consensus on, not paying facilitators, continuing to pay part-time contributors, because at the end of the day, we want, I would assume most facilitators want part-time people to be converted to full-time, because I think when you're full-time, you're fully engaged, you can drive more value than the sum of an equivalent amount of FTEs, right? So, the retention bit I think is quite important. And then for delegates, I think there's probably a spectrum there where if you go to the cap where you're getting like 12K, you probably shouldn't be eligible for source cred, in my opinion. But if you're just starting out and you're not getting much, then I think you would have much more, the source credit that you generate would be much more beneficial. So the first part I think is more important at this stage because we want to bring in more people, right? Like I think the community is already, pretty highly engaged in a lot of things. But we need more people to come in and be a part of this ecosystem and community, right? So that's kind of my take on it.
Thanks for sharing, Mark.
I mean, in terms of overhead, I'd wonder if drawing that line between part-time and full-time would be more work to keep updated than just to be able to draw the line between receiving any MakerDAO compensation and those people who are new to the forum.
Yeah, so like echo that, like figuring out like which people are like part-time enough to deserve source credit is like not going to be fun. Not something we really want to do, right? A, it's just difficult, and like B, it requires us to like know how much all the part-time people who want source credit are being paid, which is not really super feasible.
I mean, I'm very curious about the second part of this, of the compensation for successful like MIPs and sub-proposals that go from, from forum posts, through the RFC, through formal submissions to actual like, passing ratification and like fruition. Yeah, I would love to hear a little bit more about that idea.
Yeah, feel free to jump in long, but so like as you were talking about earlier, we did try with source cred the idea of like a governance boost, right, of trying to incentivize posting more on MIPs and signal requests, and basically because of the pay trick algorithm, when you mess with some of the weights, like you get some kind of peculiar results, since it is building a graph based on everyone's likes, and if you really ratchet up the like weight on one particular category, it ends up flowing kind of weird. So essentially, when we were trying to get that to work, we couldn't find a data set that really suggested it was actually doing what we wanted to do, which was to compensate participation on MIPs and signal requests, or MIPs and sub proposals, obviously. So kind of the counter to that would be, all right, so what if you instead, whether you take like a pool and divide it among all the successful proposals for that month, or, there's a lot of different ways you could implement it. But the idea being that like, if something is proposed and passed through governance, that it was, in theory, something the community wanted, a quality signal. So maybe we just incentivize that directly, rather than trying to like more vaguely incentivize participation.
Yeah, so there's sort of slight downside to doing that, which sort of Peyton alluded to previously, is that the whole kind of point of source credit is that it tracks like kind of more miscellaneous inputs, right? In terms of, if someone gives a lot of feedback on a signal, ends up and that gathers a lot of activity, then that's in source code size is like an indication that like that's kind of useful, right? Whereas if we just pay for proposals, we like lose that side of it more or less completely. Like the way we would probably do it would be to pay like authors and contributors who are marked down on MIPs, for example. But like there's nothing forcing authors to put contributors in, or like then it becomes a little bit of a weird sort of decision matrix. Like, who do you add as a contributor? Like, how much contribution makes sense to be added, given that people might get paid out bounties for it. So yeah. Yeah, so Joshua mentioned splitting MIPs into smaller MIPs so you can get more credit payouts. That's essentially the reason we would have, well, that's an argument in favor of having a pool of like bounty money that was split across all successful MIPs in a month, right? So it's kind of pointless to just create more.
I mean, also kind of the guard against like making too many MIPs is the MIPs framework itself, right? Like you don't need to make 3 MIPs when you could just make 1.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing, right? Like if someone's like obviously trying to abuse it for bounties, then we would just tell them to combine them, right? But yeah, it's like spam is definitely an issue, a potential issue with that. But it's the potential issue with like any system we use for incentivizing activity.
Yeah, so Paper writes in chat, are we trying to pay people to do governance or pay people to show up? In my opinion, I think it's to pay people to be more proactive with actually like putting things through governance. Like I think like Tim Shupi is a great example of somebody who's extremely proactive at getting like very needed signal requests and governance pulls up. Yeah, I think it's more to incentivize that kind of behavior. Correct me if I'm wrong, Rose.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few, like as Pippa said, right? There's a few things that we potentially would want to incentivize, and not all of them are the same. Like I think it's kind of hard to, as Mark mentioned, it's kind of hard to actually use source code to bring people to the forum, and you run into the risk of like having people trying to abuse it in that case, right? Because you have people coming for the value or for the money rather than because they're interested in the protocol. So I think it's a better tool to kind of to manage that retention, or like that kind of bridge until people, you know, from where like new community members sort of like want to stay engaged but don't sort of have the experience or desire at that point to join ACU or become a delegate or do something where they actually get a salary. And then yeah, as Pippa said, like a kind of third thing we would want generally, right, is to get more people doing useful MIPS, signal requests, etc.
Cool. Getting a lot of signals to move on here. Do you want to give anyone else who hasn't had a chance to weigh in a shot? But yeah, if you have thoughts or general things about this, yeah, feel free to drop me a DM. Like we're curious about this, and in general, it came up in the forum, so glad we were able to engage a little bit here. Cool. Yeah, well, thank you, David. I'll move on to our last scheduled topic. Yeah, we are on the third one. DAI liquidity solutions. You want to give this a go, David?
Yeah, I could introduce the topic, but I think there's a lot of heavy hitters here in our participants that have a lot of really great opinions on this. But in general, just to set us up, Maker has been not struggling, but wrestling with the idea of what is the ideal model for creating DAI liquidity and also MKR liquidity in the markets, like not just in the L1 markets, but also in the L2 markets to bootstrap those markets. There's the question of do we kind of like outsource it to trusted third parties? Do we do like a protocol owned liquidity model where the protocol itself diverts surplus to funding a liquidity position? And basically the conversation I want to set us up to have here is what is the ideal model? What are the high level requirements? And basically I want to open it up to the main people who have like the strongest opinions to really lead this convo.
And worth noting, there are like a few different elements here. Like we saw Wintermute come up and a few other things there. There's also like L2 considerations and a lot of different places we could be focusing the liquidity. I see Maker Man raised his hand, and I know this is a topic near and dear to him. So yeah, take it away.
All right, I'll give this a shot. I have not published my work on this. So my take on this, based on my research, is that something like the Uniswap V2 liquidity has ideal characteristics for DAO-owned liquidity. My work, You can work assumptions on this. But the idea is once you get to about a third of the overall liquidity paired with the stable coin, you get some really nice properties from a AMM model. First of all, 30% is a big number, right? Literally, it becomes the market. It defines the market that every arbitrager is going to use as a liquidity source. In terms of price support, at a third of the liquidity, you're paired with DAI at 2,000. The most you can go down with that third, and that's if you eat all the additional liquidity, is about a factor of 9. That AMM with fees will also basically, the fees DCA the LP pool. So you set up an LP pool, 30%, let's just pick it as a number that's very high, but it's a achievable target. If you earn 10% in that pool, it means you will soak up 3% of the available liquidity, either in DAI or Maker, take your pick, which means 30%, 3, 6, it's basically about 20 years to eat all the liquidity, should you get 10% per year or thereabouts on that. Basically, it's a roll the liquidity through the liquidity contract. You can do the math on it at 0.3%. It's actually ideal. And the beauty of the V2 liquidity is it actually sinks DAI. There is no price range that you can pull Maker out of that contract at. There will always be Maker at some price stuck in that contract, and the same with DAI. You can debate DAI being a liquidity source, but it basically sinks it all. And if the DAO owns the liquidity, the DAO basically earns fees on that liquidity. We don't even need an auction system if we make that kind of liquidity. We can basically buy Maker from that contract, pair it with DAI, stick it back in. And if we're smart, we use an MEV bot to do it so that we don't get front run on it. And so in the end, I have about 20 different reasons. This was part of a proposition scheme for growth. That the concept here is that Maker DAI should also be able to participate in governance. It's an ideal way to vest, and that basically conceptually the V2 liquidity contract for the DAOs and even conceptually for long-term investors is just a really great play on long-term. You stick it in governance, you can do exactly what Rune wanted, which is you can borrow DAI against that LP. And the thing is, if you look at it just as an investment vehicle, I don't care. Permanent loss is really, I consider it a misnomer. But when you look at it, pairing a token with a stable coin, there's no correlation in price. Whereas if you do ETH and Maker, ETH can drop a factor of 2 and Maker will go right with it, basically. And then you don't get hardly any action in terms of fees. But with an uncorrelated stable coin, my work using these things, you get at least double the fee return being paired with a stable coin, and you get this price support. There's so many great features about the AMM model, particularly the V2 50/50. I've studied Balancer, I've studied other models. You can do different things, but this one is so compelling. It's democratic too. Anybody who owns that LP, the only people that are in front of you are the V3 LP, and basically everybody in V2, they share all those fees equally. And the idea that these things are just going to hoover up liquidity over long periods of time to the point where you get to 60, 70 to 80% of the total liquidity there, you get great price support, you get huge liquidity. You then have to start selling the LP. The DAO would have to do it.
Audio cut out?
Yeah, same here.
Maker and your audio cut out. Come on. You're just getting to the juicy part. Well, yeah, he wanted to do a Maker DAI LP that somehow can participate in governance as well. He did a bunch of big math on it, but I wish we could hear him talking. But yeah, he's been telling me about this. I actually like the idea. One of my thoughts on it was maybe we could for people that just provide to that LP, maybe we can bond them Maker tokens somehow, or we absorb the LP to ourselves, and they get a governance share by having been in this LP. I don't know, sort of an Omish model, but not exactly. Maker Man, your audio gonna come back on? I don't know.
Yeah, he might have dropped if he comes back.
Yeah. But yeah, I do think that our illiquidity is pretty dire, and have some people like wanting to just like panic sell, not realizing that we're a liquid market selling several thousand maker.
Sorry, guys, lost my connect.
Oh, there we go. Okay, he's back.
Urban was doing some fill for you, Maker Panda. I don't remember the exact sentence you cut off, but if you do wish to rejoin, feel free.
No, well, you're muted now if you're talking. Someone unmute him. Damn it. Well, yeah, that's one liquidity solution. Wintermute's another, but regardless, I think it's probably one of our most pressing issues is getting a liquid market for MKR itself. I had a couple of friends who I got to buy MKR. Well, they bought a very tiny amount, but apparently they got really excited and bought like, I don't know, something like close to like 8,000 between the two of them, maybe even 10,000. And they were getting margin called on equities, and they're like, "Oh shit, market dump!" Fucking, sorry, market sold like 8,000 maker, and not realizing what the hell they might do to the price. Whereas some people who were familiar with how liquid we are, like knew to spread it out over a given period of time. So I think our liquidity is one of the more pressing issues. If Maker Man would get his mic back up.
Yeah, my understanding also is that like liquidity is very important for the fundamental security of the protocol. Like even in the case of in a situation where there's flop auctions, right? Like that, where MKR has to be minted and auctioned off. Like it would probably benefit us in that situation if there was a huge pool of protocol-owned liquidity to like make those trades against, right? The more liquidity, the less price impact. Is that the right way of understanding it?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, yeah, that'll be a pretty worst case scenarios where we have to bail out bad debt right now and mint maker into like a liquid market.
So I think there's a lot of valid reasons, right, for LPing and creating liquidity. Trying to create liquidity so we can flop into it is not really one of them. For all intents and purposes, at the scale that we are working at right now and at the truly horrid state of liquidity of MKR, and even if you compare it to other DeFi tokens, even if you got it into quote unquote good shape, you are not going to be able to flop 50 mil, 100 mil of bad debt, no matter what state of liquidity you get MKR to. So from a flop perspective, this is not really it moves the needle so little that it's practically meaningless. Like the real mechanism you have for backstopping is you just have an insurance buffer in the surplus buffer. That's not to say that liquidity provisioning is a bad idea, but justifying it because of making flops more effective, there's flops is a meme. It's not a practical mechanism.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification, Nick.
Also curious if anyone has any thoughts kind of on MKR liquidity versus like DAI liquidity. Like obviously both are gonna affect us quite a bit. And we've had a few discussions with the mandated actors about the L2 liquidity being pretty soft on DAI in particular.
Now, my understanding is like DAI liquidity is a lot more about business development, right? Like if you can ensure DAI liquidity, then you can ensure that you're the leading stablecoin in a given like network of markets, right? Whereas like the MKR liquidity piece is more about just, I guess, the health of the protocol, like, health of investor options, to some extent also, like, I guess, building up a capital battery if it's like MKR DAI. Like, yeah, I don't know. I'm curious about the maker side because that's the part that's just a little bit less clear to me.
If we're talking about on-chain liquidity in general, like the goal should be to make like DAI the routing token for like all AMM transactions, right? Like USDC kind of does this by default. But like that's kind of the big goal because then you get all the trading fees on everything, and you have a lot of liquidity for stuff we have as collateral and all this sort of thing.
So my question is, like, how does the DAO arrive at like the ideal solution? Does somebody have to spearhead a proposal that goes into RFC? Like, because I know that there's kind of a like time sensitivity around this topic. Like, if we don't move quick enough, we kind of lose an edge here. But I'm curious on people's thoughts of like who should ideally spearhead this kind of initiative. And yeah, how do we actually get to like a wise ideal model for this?
Yeah, I guess part of the problem is like there's a lot of different solutions or different routes you could go to provide liquidity. So even arriving at like the best one is not a trivial task.
I guess that's also part of the allure, or like the attraction to using somebody like Wintermute, because it just gives us way like more efficient like ways to like move. Like, it doesn't take as long because it doesn't have to go through all of governance and all the stuff that we basically have to build around it if it is going to be protocol owned and managed. So Paper Imperium asks, what's the exact problem we're trying to solve instead of just taking a mediocre attempt at several? I think like the mediocre attempt at several just ends up tying up a lot more resources. So like, it's like any like software solution design, like you don't necessarily want to do like 5 things at once. You want to kind of identify what's the wisest approach and then put all your resources into that. So that's kind of why I'm probably against trying several intermediate like solutions. I am interested in like maybe 2, like for example, a limited engagement with a third-party market maker while also building out like the protocol owned side or model.
And definitely some question is like DAI versus MKR. There are several differences there, right? Different reasons for it. But one reason liquidity comes up A because we're talking about it, and B because you can provide them together, right? Like, could provide a giant maker DAI pair like MakerMan was suggesting.
Yeah, there's also another approach that actually Lunaman is pointing out, like partnering with projects on layer 2 and incentivizing them to use DAI as their LP pair could be an effective way to boost DAI liquidity and also do some business development stuff.
Yeah,
Is it like
particularly as
sorry,
go ahead, sorry, Long.
So there's only a handful of ways we can actually like do this, right? Like either we pay someone to provide liquidity, either we mint DAI and accept not being 100% backed and use that to get liquidity. We use a surplus buffer, in which case we're kind of very limited in how much we can do because the surplus buffer is small. Or so we can mint maker and sell that to get the funds we need to hold the liquidity. Or one option, Ramesh mentioned, was we can borrow against MKO on like Aave or something to get DAI to use for liquidity, which seems a little sketchy, but maybe that's a possibility as well. Or I guess also use some other protocol like Tokamak or like Ohm bonds or something something like that. So like the kind of important part of this question is like, how do we do that part? Because it's, well, I mean, it's also important like where we're sending the liquidity, but like we need to like have the money to spend on liquidity.
I guess one question, like from a technical standpoint, is minting DAI to provide to an LP pair, how different is that than the D3M implementation in terms of like, we mint the DAI, we deposit it, in this case with Maker, and then we'd essentially receive collateral back in the LP token itself.
Because one can become severely under collateralized and the other, it's possible, but it's much less likely, right? Like if with an LP token, the volatility is reduced, but it's not gone. So if you start minting DAI against, you know, some other token right to make an LP, you could, if the market drops enough, right, end up having the, you know, depending on the size of this thing, having it make the system go insolvent.
Thanks for that, Nick. Yeah, that's a good point.
And it's kind of different, right, from say like a D3M in terms of like, right, when the market moves down on Aave, right, and okay, fine, people get liquidated, right? There's kind of this self-sustaining mechanism to kind of, well, this like feedback loop to try to keep Aave solvent, right, which keeps our, you know, D3M kind of solvent. With the LP stuff, we don't have that guarantee, right? And so, okay, the market dumps. What do we do? Do we start unwinding that position, or do we, you know, we end up becoming speculators effectively, right? Trying to guess, is the market going to go up or down? And that sounds like a terrible place to be from a protocol level, at least. Right, maybe on the finance, you know, treasury management side, you can do some speculation, but not on the protocol level.
Yeah, I think one of the problems is just like all the options are kind of unpalatable, right? Like that definitely is one of them, right? And it's unpalatable. But like, so it's minting MKR and selling that to buy DAI to use for liquidity. So it's not really doing much liquidity stuff at all because we're limited by the surplus buffer. Like we have to make some trade-off, right, to actually deploy like significant amounts of liquidity.
Out of curiosity, have we heard any more from the Wintermute side? I don't know, Nadia or Bourbon, even if you've been in touch.
I haven't reached out to him in a little bit. Been sort of myself kind of hibernating. I think Nadia's bandwidth might be pretty stretched thin, but I hope we can organize at least a community call where, because last time he came on was actually had COVID during the call while he was on, so he was all over the place. But I think we should have a dedicated call for this topic at some point. If Nadia can coordinate that or somebody. But as it stands, it looks like we just kind of like put that topic to the side for now. I hope we can return to it sooner than later. And we also, I think we also were going to get a quote from Ledger Prime, just to see what other offers are on the table, though I am more partial to Intermute, having met the team and liking the people there. But, you know, the more offers on the table, the better.
We might do kind of a last call then on this topic, see as we're kind of naturally winding down. A good question from Lunaman asking if the goal is to incentivize liquidity for DAI in terms of LP pairs or also on L2 lending platforms. obviously don't speak for everyone, but I think like yes, probably like L2 seems particularly important at the moment, but like also just in general, as long as talking about if DAI is the kind of go-to pair rather than ETH, that's super good.
Yeah, I mean, the plan is for us to eventually launch Maker on L2, right? So that would provide like DAI liquidity for lending or for borrowing, sorry, I guess.
Cool. Seems like this is kind of naturally winding down. We don't often get to our open discussion section, so I kind of want to take advantage of that if there are other topics. Obviously, we started the call with Bourbon talking about gains, and there's been a few other things in the sidebar. So if anyone wants to revisit any of those, please speak up.
I gave the intros I wanted to do. Yeah, I don't know. If Luna wants, I mean, if no one has anything else to talk about, maybe Luna wants to hop on and give a little intro about their project. But I might have done that already. And you know, I'm trying to see how. I mean, they are promoting our our main product, right? Wondering how we can work together because there's very few projects that are showcasing DAI as the token of choice. And I'd like to see, and also they seem to have developed some pretty interesting, really well-designed tokenomics for their own token to create liquidity, and maybe we can borrow some of their ideas as well. He's posting some of them in the chat as well. But yeah, you know, you could view it as a casino, but we might be able to use it as some kind of tool during auctioning, or anyone here might be able to use it as a hedging tool for themselves to hedge their positions. Yeah, didn't mean to like advertise, but sorry, Long, but I thought it was interesting. But,
Right, well, last call then.
I guess Mark asked about tokenomics. We could talk about tokenomics for 10 minutes if we want.
When new tokenomics, indeed.
I mean,
It's
I
also
feel like it would be good to have Rune for this conversation since he's like really spearheading the main proposal that everybody's going to be talking around the tokenomic redesign.
I'll use the opportunity just to rant at you all a little bit. I'll keep it to be a very short rant, though. You know, the whole point of tokenomics is to, you know, incentivize good governance at the end of the day, right? That's what Maker needs. And I see it as really somewhat of a secondary issue to the more fundamental problem, which is really scaling and integrating with the legacy economy, right? Like there's been a lot of hot buzz in DeFi lately about, you know, the vote escrowed model, and lots of projects are switching to it. And, you know, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I think it is interesting, but I would just caution people not to get too caught up in navel gazing over designing the sexiest tokenomics mechanism, to forget that all that really matters is, you know, like, how do we get DAI used by 1 billion people? And, you know, how do we support a meaningful chunk of the global economy using the protocol, right? Like, you know, I think if we 10x the DAI supply and 10x the system's revenue, the tokenomics doesn't really matter. And I'm not sure, I don't think the tokenomics is blocking us from doing that. And so while it's good to design a better tokenomics system, like I just caution people not to get too caught up in it, because, you know, the MKR token at the end of the day, you know, has the rights to all future revenues from the system. and that's enough to provide a value to the asset, and then you could figure, create. I prefer to focus on creating the value first, and the the more specific tokenomic mechanisms later. So, which isn't to say that we shouldn't redesign the tokenomic mechanisms to be better. Just, I don't know. I feel like it's become this like totalizing thing where people are so focused on it, and we might spend a whole bunch of time like making better tokenomics and drop the ball on scaling or other important things. So that's my rant. Thank you for coming.
Always a pleasure to have a Kurt rant. So thank you, Kurt. I saw Lunaman mention it, and also shout out to whoever utilized the anonymous suggestion box for the GNR. We tend not to get a ton of traffic there, but there was a call out to ask about, is it DevConnect in Amsterdam in April, to see if anyone is going there. Drop a link in case you're unfamiliar with the event. I think it got mentioned in our Discord earlier today as well. That's my plug. Any other plugs for this week or early next?
Yeah, if anybody has, if anybody's interested in contributing, who has really great written English skills, who is not a technical person, feel free to reach out to myself or anybody on the governance communications team. We are looking for contributors to help us put together some stakeholder publications like the Maker Relay, like the Maker Governance Review, and others. And obviously it is compensated. So if you know anybody who's trying to get a foot in the door, put them in touch with us.
Long reminding me that we do in fact have a recognized delegate, or meet your delegate rather, meeting for next week, Wednesday. Drop the link to that in chat. Hasu will be joining us to talk about their platform. Right on. Well, happy to give a little bit of time back to everyone then. I appreciate everyone chipping in on the topics here. And yeah, thanks for joining us. Please do reach out if you have questions, comments, or suggestions. Thanks, everybody.